Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I never thought I'd see the inside of my high school again after graduation. But when the outbreak spread past Shreveport and crossed into East Texas, authorities scrambled to find anywhere they could lock down large groups of uninfected people. Old evacuation plans from the hurricane days were dug back up, reissued, modified for a biohazard threat. Henderson High School, where I used to run AV Club, was on that list. It had solar backup, a storm shelter under the cafeteria, and a nurse's station that could be reconfigured for triage. They called it a temporary holding center. "You'll be out in 72 hours, the officer at the checkpoint had said. That was 10 days ago. I wasn't a student anymore. 24, working tech support in Tyler before the world went silent. When the buses stopped running and the city sent out emergency SMS broadcasts telling people to seek the nearest FEMA drop zone, I didn't have a lot of options. My parents were gone. I'd lost contact with my sister. Henderson was closest, so I grabbed my bug-out bag, a half-charged walkie, and went on foot. By the time I got there, they were already welding the gate shut. Inside were more than just students. Some were kids from the middle school nearby. Others were teachers. But then there were people like me, adults from the area who had nowhere else to go. A few elderly residents. 2 entire families from a trailer park west of 259. Even the principal's own wife and baby daughter were living in his office. They turned the gym into sleeping quarters, set up latrines on the football field with water barrels rigged for showers. A couple of the old ROTC kids helped the guards patrol. It looked organized, like it might work. For a few days it did. They said the infection couldn't get in, that we were sealed off. But rumors always find cracks. There was talk that someone got through the perimeter near the staff parking lot. Someone injured. They brought him in on day 4. An older man, maybe 50, wearing a stained work shirt from Martin's Auto Salvage, his face pale as snow. Nobody saw him get checked. No one knew where he came from. Just that the next morning he was gone. That same morning a teacher, Mr. Knoll, started vomiting in the staff lounge. By noon, he was restrained in the nurse's office, babbling nonsense, scratching at the walls. They said it was dehydration, flu, panic, anything but what it was. Day 5, the nurse went missing. Her assistant locked herself in the supply closet and no one could get her out. When they finally pried the door open hours later, she was gone. Just a pile of bloody scrubs and drag marks leading toward the hall. They stopped making announcements after that. I stuck close to the upper levels. The science wing had solid doors and backup locks. I bunked with 2 others, Mason, a former substitute teacher, and Clarice, who used to work reception at the elementary school. None of us were brave, just quiet. People started grouping off as the unease grew. Fights broke out over bottled water. A few kids went missing during firewatch patrols and didn't come back. That night, the main hallway lights failed. We heard the screaming from the lower level. Not the kind you hear in movies, not sharp or panicked, just interrupted. Like a sound trying to rise but getting drowned out. After that, there were footsteps, unsteady, mismatched. I stayed by the stairwell, listening. The next morning, there was blood smeared along the railing. A girl's jacket torn in 2 near the lockers. The guards posted a handwritten note. All students to remain in designated quarters. No entry to gym, cafeteria, Oregon admin wing until further notice. Then they disappeared. No guards at the stairwell. No one on watch at the doors. Just silence. Mason and Clarice wanted to stay put. They had their reasons. Clarice had a niece in the lower hall. She didn't want to believe the worst. Mason said he could still hear voices over the emergency channel, that they'd get rescued soon. But I had the walkie. I knew the truth. Dead air. Channel 3 used to be FEMA Regional Command. Now, static. I started moving supplies from the chemistry lab into our room. Snacks from the vending machine, water jugs, batteries. I pried open the janitor's locker and took what I could. A flashlight, heavy gloves, and a short crowbar. Not much, but it felt like armor. By evening we heard movement again. Closer this time. No footsteps now, just dragging. I tried to sleep, but there was a sound outside the door around 2 in the morning. Not a knock. A scrape. Something hard along the glass. Mason peeked out through the side window. He turned pale, then backed away without a word. "It's Principal Garcia," he whispered. "He's wrong. His face." I looked. Garcia's face was smeared in blood. His lower jaw sagged unnaturally. One hand still clutched a ring of office keys, the other hung like it was dislocated. But his eyes, they didn't see. They didn't blink. He just stood there, staring past the door, slow breaths misting the glass. Then, as if on cue, he turned and shuffled down the hall. That's when I knew. This wasn't a drill, wasn't panic or bad management. Someone let it in. No one said the word, but we all knew it. And that silence hung in the air thicker than the blood scent creeping under the doorframe. I decided we needed to leave. Not just our room, the whole school. But escape meant one thing. We had to go through the main hall. At sunrise, we cracked the door. No movement. Just the long corridor, quiet and dim, with lockers half open and sunlight leaking in from a shattered upper window. Mason volunteered to cover the back. Clarice held a desk leg like a club. I carried the crowbar. We made it halfway down the hall before the noise started again. Thuds from the far end, near the library. We ducked into a classroom. Inside were 3 others. 2 seniors I recognized, and a woman I didn't. Her arm was wrapped in gauze, red, soaking through. One of the kids said her name was Mrs. Belton. She'd been hiding since the nurse vanished. She wasn't talking, just breathing shallow. Her skin was pale, eyes sunken. I didn't like the look of it. We moved on. Outside the classroom, the smell changed. Heavier. Decay mixed with something sweet and rotten. We passed the library doors, one hanging off its hinge. Inside, books scattered, chairs overturned, and a single body lying motionless in the reading corner. I didn't check if it was dead. I didn't want to know. We reached the admin wing and found the main security console wrecked. Cameras offline, radios fried. Someone had tried to barricade the front office with desks and chairs, but it looked rushed. Blood pooled by the attendance counter. A backpack lay open, half-packed with meds and bottled water. Someone had tried to flee. That's when we heard it again, behind us. Footsteps, uneven, wet. We turned and there it was. A woman in a cafeteria apron, her face torn along one cheek, teeth bared in a frozen grimace. She didn't scream, just walked forward with that jerky, stumbling gait. Clarice froze. I stepped between them and swung the crowbar. The first hit knocked her sideways. The second made her collapse. She didn't move after that, but we didn't linger. More sounds echoed down the hall now, others waking, others smelling blood. We ran, through the teacher's lounge, past the boiler room, toward the double doors at the rear loading dock. Locked, Mason yelled. I swung the crowbar, hit the bolt once, twice. It snapped on the third strike. The door swung open, and we spilled into the sunlight, lungs burning, eyes blinded. We didn't stop moving. The loading dock faced the east side of the building, the rear lot behind the gym where food trucks used to park. What used to be a blacktop was now a graveyard of rusted metal, overturned dumpsters, and abandoned delivery vans. The air reeked of burned plastic and rotting food. The field beyond the chain-link fence looked calm at first, just empty bleachers and trampled grass. But the moment we stepped into the open, something shifted. There were at least a dozen of them in sight, shambling across the track or standing near the broken goalposts, their bodies slack but alert in a way that made my stomach turn. They weren't sprinting, not like in the movies, but they moved with a kind of dreadful purpose, changing direction the instant we crossed into view. One of them, a man in a shredded maintenance uniform, limped on a twisted leg that shouldn't have been able to bear weight. Another was barefoot, her ankles shredded to the bone, yet she advanced like it meant nothing. Clarice was the first to panic. She bolted for the old concession stand, waving for us to follow. I dragged Mason with me, not looking back at the door we came from. I could already hear it swinging in the wind, the hallway beyond it echoing with the sound of metal clanging against tile. We reached the stand and barricaded the steel roll-up window with a mop handle, then crouched in the back room behind a soda fridge that hadn't worked in years. No one spoke for a while. We just listened. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circled the outside of the cinder-block shack. Something dragged along the metal siding. The window rattled once. Then again. We could hear them sniffing. Not loudly, just barely, like animals checking a scent. When they finally moved on, it wasn't out of confusion. It was boredom, like they'd just lost interest. Mason sat down on a crate, shaking, rubbing his hands together like they were covered in something he couldn't wipe off. Clarice was quiet too, but I saw her eyes. She wasn't going to last like this. She needed direction. So did he. So did I, if I was being honest. "There's a maintenance trail behind the north fence," I said finally. "It leads toward the railroad easement." Mason looked up. "The one behind the tennis courts?" I nodded. "Yeah, we used to sneak off that way senior year. I don't think anyone ever took down the service gate." Clarice hesitated. "And after that?" "Depends. If the tracks are still clear, they follow west toward town. North, it's just woods for a few miles." "Woods sound better than town," she muttered. I leaned back against the wall and tried to think it through. The smart play wasn't about distance. It was about population. Downtown Henderson might have had shelters, but it also had thousands of people when this thing started. The woods past the tracks, that led towards the state park, Old Sabine Bottom, sparse cabins, open land, and if we were lucky, maybe one of those old emergency ranger stations with a working radio. We waited another hour, then slipped out through the side door, crouching low and weaving through the alley between the gym and the old band hall. Most of the infected had wandered off toward the cafeteria side of the building by then, maybe chasing noise, maybe memory. Either way, we moved quiet, keeping close to the walls and avoiding the open field. The trail I remembered wasn't as clear as it used to be, overgrown in spots, washed out in others. But the fence was still there, and the gate was open just a crack, like someone had passed through not long before. We didn't talk until we were half a mile from the school, sweat soaking through our shirts, lungs working harder than they should have. The trees grew denser, the trail narrower. We passed a fallen log smeared in something brownish red. Animal or human, I couldn't tell. None of us stopped to check. Just before sunset, we reached the edge of a dry creek bed and spotted the first sign of other survivors. A tent, collapsed in the dirt, its poles snapped and fabric torn. Scattered near it were food wrappers, a water jug, and something that made us all freeze. A set of handcuffs and a rusted shotgun lying half buried in the dust. No shells in sight. The receiver cracked. Useless. There was no body, just drag marks. We didn't camp there. We pushed on another half mile until we found a hollow near an old fire ring, probably from a scout troop years back. We built no fire, just huddled under the roots of a fallen oak and passed around a protein bar I'd been saving. The walkie crackled once during the night, but it was only static. Clarice asked if I thought help was still coming. I didn't answer. She stopped asking. At dawn, we climbed the ridge toward the rail line, which ran east to Longview and west toward Athens. We spotted 3 freight cars frozen on the track, graffiti-covered and silent. No sign of life. I kept us off the gravel, walking parallel to the line in the brush. Easier to hide that way. Mid-morning we found tracks. Fresh ones. Not just footsteps, but tire marks. Someone had driven something heavy down the gravel bed not long ago. A pickup or military truck. Whatever it was, the trail led north off the rail line and into the woods. "We follow it?" Clarice asked. "I want to know who they are," I said. "Could be survivors, Could be worse. We followed at a distance. An hour later, we found them. The cabin was small, cinder block walls, and a rusted metal roof, tucked deep into the trees with no trail leading to it. Military surplus crates stacked by the door, camo netting half draped over the windows, a perimeter line strung with cans and wire. Someone had fortified it well. But the door was open. No voices, no lights, just the faint smell of smoke and the low buzz of flies. I went in first, crowbar raised. The living room was empty. So was the kitchen. But the back bedroom told the story. There were 2 bodies, one adult, one child, curled on a mattress under a thick blanket. Both had darkened skin, dried lips, and signs of struggle. I couldn't tell if it had been the infection or something else. Maybe starvation. Maybe a quiet decision. Clarice stayed outside. Mason followed me in and knelt by a desk in the corner, flipping through a spiral-bound notebook left open. He didn't say anything, just held it up. The last entry read, "Radio's dead. Food's gone. I'm sorry, Sam. I can't wait anymore." We took what we could carry. 2 sealed MREs, a wind-up flashlight, and a flare gun with 1 round. Mason closed the door behind us, gently, like he didn't want to wake them. We moved west again, aiming for the Sabine River. By the time the sun hit its peak, we were low on water and walking slower. The trees opened up into a shallow valley, and we could see the remains of a ranger station on the far end. The roof had caved in, but the concrete shell stood. A solar panel was still mounted on a pole nearby, broken but intact. I crept up first, checking corners. No one inside, just dust, leaves, and an old radio transmitter. Dead. I popped the back open, battery fried, but the antenna was intact. "Maybe we can fix it," Mason said. "I did a semester in communications." I let him try. Anything to stay moving forward. Clarice set up a watch near the door. I cleaned what was left of the rain barrels outside and started boiling water over a sterno can from the cabin kit. It felt like something close to safety, not normal, not real, but still, better than what we had. The illusion lasted until dusk. That's when we heard the growl of an engine. A black Humvee rolled up the ridge, no markings, no lights. It stopped 50 feet from the station and idled for a minute before the driver shut it off. 3 people got out. 2 wore mismatched tactical gear, plates over denim, makeshift helmets, face coverings. The 3rd wore no gear at all, just jeans and a hunting jacket. He carried a short rifle slung over one shoulder and a sidearm clipped to his belt. They didn't speak at first, just stood watching us. "FEMA?" I asked. The man in the jacket laughed once. "Not in months." "Then who?" "Cleaners," he said. Clarice stepped closer. "What does that mean?" He tilted his head. "We erase what shouldn't spread." I tightened my grip on the crowbar. "We're not infected." "Not my call," he replied. And then I saw the spray bottle clipped to his vest. Bleach solution, decon markings. His boots had biohazard tape across the soles. Not official. Makeshift. They weren't here to help us. They weren't here for aid or supplies. These people had outfitted themselves to look like a response team, just enough to confuse or delay whoever they came across. That meant one thing. They had done this before, more than once. The man in the hunting jacket stepped forward, his eyes scanning the ranger station's doorway behind me. "You got food?" I didn't answer. Clarice stepped to my left, and Mason moved behind the wall, trying not to draw attention to the makeshift comm setup he'd been working on. The wind-up flashlight was still spinning on the floor, faintly humming as it charged the small battery bank. If they saw that, they'd know we had power, maybe even working gear. "I asked you a question," the man said again. "Food, water, any medicine?" "You're welcome to check what's outside," I said slowly, raising my hands but keeping the crowbar low. "We don't want trouble." "Neither do we," he replied, "but rules are rules. Exposure site means nothing goes in or out. No infection, no rumors, no stories. You understand?" He stepped another few feet forward. That's when I noticed the sidearm on his hip wasn't standard issue. It was a matte black .40 caliber with a makeshift suppressor welded from plumbing pipe. That wasn't some scavenger's lucky find. That was crafted. Deliberate. I took a small step back. We're clean. You think that matters? He said, almost laughing. The guy on the left raised his weapon, a short-barreled shotgun modified for close quarters. His trigger discipline was shaky. The third person, a woman in military cargo pants and a ski mask, stayed silent but kept her eyes on Clarice, like she was waiting for a twitch, a flinch, any excuse. I didn't wait. I dropped flat to the ground, swinging the crowbar hard toward the man's ankle. The hit connected with a solid crunch. He went down hard, yelling, grabbing his leg. The woman raised her rifle. Mason kicked the door open from the side and slammed the flashlight casing into her face. She fired once, wild and high, blowing a fist-sized hole through the cabin roof. Splinters rained down. Clarice grabbed the flare gun and fired it straight at the third man. Red light exploded in his face, lighting him up like a torch. He screamed and dropped the shotgun, stumbling backward and crashing into the brush. Mason tackled the one with the broken ankle and yanked the pistol from his belt. We ran. No pack, no gear, just the pistol, the crowbar, and Clarice's backpack with a single MRE and water filter inside. We didn't head back toward the tracks. We knew they'd follow. Instead, we went east, cutting through thick underbrush, ducking under fallen trees, and pushing through sticker bushes until we reached a dry creek cut. We slid down the embankment and kept low, following the curve until we reached a rock outcrop that created a kind of overhang. We squeezed in underneath and waited. It took an hour before we were sure they hadn't followed. By then, the light was fading. I'd bruised my knee on the run, and Clarice had a gash on her shoulder from where a tree branch caught her jacket and tore through to the skin. We tore a strip from Mason's t-shirt and tied it off. No time to worry about stitches or disinfectant. She didn't flinch. She didn't say anything at all. Her eyes were distant. I didn't push. When night fell, we moved again, south this time, toward the road. Not the highway. Just a 2-lane back road that snaked through the pines between Henderson and Price. It was risky. Cars might mean infected. But staying in the woods meant no food, no shelter, and no chance of help. By moonlight, we spotted a roadside sign for a church, New Pine Grove Chapel, 1 mile ahead. Maybe it was still standing. Maybe it had a basement. Maybe, just maybe, someone had turned it into a haven. We reached it just after midnight. The front doors were shut, but not locked. Inside, the pews were overturned, and the altar had been stripped of anything useful. A few candles burned low in the corners, stuck into jars of wax. There were signs of people, cans, bottles, blankets, but no one there now. At least, not visibly. We made for the sacristy and bolted the door behind us. It was small, lined with shelves and a few dusty robes, but defensible. Clarice curled up on the floor. Mason slumped against the wall and fell asleep holding the pistol in his lap. I stayed awake, watching the crack under the door for movement. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps outside. Not dragging, not shambling. Boots. I held my breath. A voice whispered from the hall. Not to us, more like to someone just out of earshot. I pressed my ear to the door. Already checked the school. Nothing left. Henderson's gone. They moved east. Another voice replied, quieter. I couldn't make it out. Then, if we don't find clean blood soon, it won't matter. They'll take us off the list. Clean blood. The phrase stuck. These weren't survivors. They were suppliers, traffickers. They were harvesting uninfected people for something or someone. And if they'd been to the school, they knew what was left there, which meant they might double back. Or worse, they might have a list of names, evacuees, shelter rosters, us. They left after 15 minutes. We didn't. At dawn, we took what was left of the food in the chapel, a can of corn, some stale crackers, and moved out through the back door. Our new plan wasn't to find help. It was to disappear. We cut across the fields toward Price, skirting around the town proper and heading for a set of oil field bunkers I remembered from a camping trip years back. It was the kind of place no one went anymore. Abandoned pump jacks, rusted metal shacks, and old workers' trailers buried half in brush. No signs, no lights, just empty land. We reached one of the old trailers by noon. The door was rusted shut, but we forced it open and found the interior mostly intact. Dust, cobwebs, and mice. But no bodies. No blood. It would do. Clarice collapsed on the mattress in the back room. Mason started inventorying the few supplies we had. I checked the windows and wedged a piece of pipe under the front door handle. It wouldn't stop a crowd, but it might delay someone. For 2 days we stayed there. We rationed water, patched Clarice's wound, and tried to fix the walkie. Mason said he could rewire the antenna using parts from the trailer's old radio, but he needed more copper. I remembered seeing an irrigation control box a half-mile back. I told him I'd go at first light. The next morning, I left with the crowbar and Mason's pistol. The woods were quiet, the sky overcast. I walked fast, not wanting to be out longer than I had to. I reached the irrigation box without trouble, broke it open, and started pulling wire when I heard the noise, a rumble low and distant. I crouched, waited. Then I saw them. 3 black SUVs heading west on a service road. No plates, no markings, all with tarped rooftop cargo racks. They weren't looking for gas. I stayed low until they passed, then ran back the long way through the gully. When I got to the trailer, the door was open. I froze. Inside, Mason stood with his hands raised, and Clarice sat on the floor, her wrists bound with duct tape. One of the masked men from before, the woman, stood behind them with a rifle. The man in the hunting jacket was back. He turned to me and smiled like he'd been expecting me. "Told you," he said. "Rules are rules." His voice had the same flat detachment as before, cold, practiced, not angry, not threatening, just routine. Like he was checking boxes on a list only he could see. I didn't lower the crowbar. He didn't raise his weapon. But the woman behind Mason shifted her stance just slightly, angling the rifle toward my center mass. She didn't blink. "I told you," he said again. "No one leaves an exposure site. Doesn't matter if you're infected or not. Doesn't matter what you've seen. What matters is what you might carry. What you might say." "You're not with any agency," I said. "You're not authorized." He smirked at that. "No one's authorized anymore. There's no chain of command. No orders. Just zones and dead air." He pointed toward the walkie clipped to my belt. "You think you'll reach someone with that? You think there's a cavalry coming?" I didn't answer. Clarice shifted on the floor, trying to work the tape loose around her wrists. Mason stayed still, eyes fixed on me. His right hand was hidden behind his leg. I caught the glance. He had the flare gun. The man stepped closer. I saw the flecks of dirt on his jacket, the dried blood at the edge of his sleeve. His sidearm was holstered, but the strap was unbuckled. "You've got a choice," he said. "We load you up, bring you in for testing, quarantine processing. It's not as bad as it sounds. And if we say no, then you're a contamination risk, and we remove risks." From the corner of my eye, I saw Clarice nod, barely. Mason's elbow twitched. That was the signal. I stepped left, fast. Mason rolled and fired the flare gun across the room. It struck the ceiling, igniting a burst of red phosphor. The heat flash lit the walls and flooded the trailer in smoke. The woman shouted and stumbled back. I lunged for the jacketed man, swung the crowbar and drove it into his shoulder. He screamed and went down. Mason grabbed Clarice, yanked her toward the door. I dove for the rifle and kicked it across the floor before the woman could recover. Smoke filled the room, choking and thick. I dragged the man's sidearm from his holster and fired a single shot into the ceiling to scatter them. We didn't aim to kill. We didn't have time. We ran. Out the back, through the brush, into the pine rows. The sky was a dark grey now, heavy with humidity. Thunder grumbled somewhere far off. Clarice was limping but moving. Mason had the crowbar now. I kept the pistol. We didn't talk until we reached the edge of a drainage basin a mile south. Clarice collapsed by a rusted culvert. Mason dropped next to her, coughing. I crouched on the ridge, watching behind us. No movement. "Do they know where we're going?" Clarice asked. "We don't know where we're going," I said. She gave a dry laugh that didn't last. "I think we're on someone's list," Mason said after a moment. "That guy talked like it wasn't just us, like they were sweeping sites, maybe the whole region." I nodded. "If the government fell apart early, if the infection spread faster than they said, maybe someone else stepped in." "Private contractors," Mason said. "Paramilitaries, corporations. Maybe worse," I added. "Anyone with a radio tower and a few guns could start calling themselves a response team." Clarice sat up. "So we go where they won't follow." "Where?" I asked. She pointed southeast. "Louisiana borders less than 50 miles. If we can get to the river, we can find a boat. Maybe push into the swamp. No roads, no structures, just trees and water. Assuming we don't run into more of them." "Then we disappear," she said. "Better than being tagged and bagged." We set out again that evening, following an old hunting trail marked with faded orange blazes. The woods grew denser, wetter, and full of biting flies. We passed 2 collapsed tree stands, a burned-out truck full of moldy clothes, and a family tent melted into the soil. No bodies, just absence. The smell of rot came and went, carried on the wind like memory. That night we camped under an overpass. An abandoned sedan sat half-submerged in the ditch. We stripped its upholstery for warmth. Mason found a road flare in the glove box, which we didn't use. Clarice's wound was healing badly. No infection signs yet, but the swelling hadn't gone down. The next morning, we reached the Sabine River. It looked different than I remembered. Wider, murkier, choked with floating debris. Something large drifted under the bridge as we approached. I thought it was a log until I saw the arm trailing behind, half submerged and motionless. We didn't check closer. We followed the bank until we found a half-sunken pontoon boat moored to a dead tree. The outboard motor was gone, but the frame held. We stripped it for parts and used the floats to build a raft. Clarice had grown quiet, her face pale. Mason kept checking the tree line. By afternoon we launched into the current and let the water carry us southeast. The woods thinned, the air grew hotter, no towns in sight, just marsh, cypress and stillness. That night we pulled ashore on a small rise where an old dock rotted into the mud. There was a shack there, barely standing, but inside we found a surprise. A man, alone, in his 60s. Grey beard, camouflage. A scoped hunting rifle leaned against the wall. He didn't raise it when he saw us, just stared. "You came from Henderson?" he asked. We nodded. He exhaled slowly. "Then you're the last." "What do you mean?" Mason asked. He sat down on a crate. "They firebombed the school yesterday morning. Whole block. I heard it on the radio, military frequency. They're wiping the slate." Clarice dropped to the floor. "Why?" "No survivors, no liability," the man said. "No witnesses." He let us stay the night. Said he used to run a fishing camp before everything fell apart. When the broadcast stopped, he moved upriver. Said the bayou kept the infected out. Said they didn't like the water. But he didn't trust us to stay. Said too many people were hunted down because of someone they brought with them. At dawn, we left. We moved further east, deeper into the wetlands. It wasn't survival anymore. It was retreat. By day 3, the silence was our only comfort. No motors, no radios, no patrols. But then, one evening we found something on a sandbar, fresh footprints, not ours. They were large, deep and recent. The tracks had come in from the water, curved inland, and disappeared into the reeds. Military-style tread, symmetrical pacing, too clean to be from a scavenger. Not dragging like the infected. No animal would move like that either. It meant one thing. Someone was still operating out here, still tracking. And they were close. We didn't speak. Clarice simply adjusted the makeshift bandage on her shoulder and pushed ahead. Her wound had gone quiet. Less swelling, no fever, but her eyes had changed. There was a focus there now, and something else beneath it. Resolve, maybe. Or fatigue ground into bone. Mason tapped the grip of the crowbar against his leg as we walked, a nervous rhythm. I checked the pistol we'd taken, 1 full magazine left, plus the flare Mason hadn't used. We veered off the riverbank and cut inland, moving into thicker undergrowth. Cypress roots rose like claws around our feet. The heat pressed down harder with every step, thick with moisture and gnats. At one point I thought I heard a chopper far off, just a low, thumping hum beyond the trees. But Mason said it was probably a generator or echo. Either way, we moved faster. We camped that night in an abandoned duck blind half sunk in the swamp. The planks were soft with rot, but it was high enough to keep us out of the muck and hidden from above. We ate cold rations in silence. Clarice cleaned her shoulder with water from a crushed jug and said nothing when she flinched. Around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of boots on plywood. Not inside, below. I reached for the pistol and peered through a crack in the boards. A figure moved through the reeds, half covered in camouflage netting. Their head was on a swivel, scanning. The weapon they carried wasn't military issue, looked homemade. A short rifle partially wrapped in cloth, likely to muffle sound. On their back was a small radio with a thin antenna, blinking red. I held my breath. They circled the blind, checked the ladder and moved on. The red light pulsed through the trees, vanishing into the mist. When dawn broke, we left fast. We didn't go back to the river. We pushed east into the wetlands, following no trail, no path, just instinct, survival. Our legs ached. Clarice was limping again. Mason was pale, sunburned and quiet, but we kept going. On the 5th day, we found the perimeter. Not a natural one. A man-made fence 10 feet high topped with razors. Buried in the brush, almost invisible until you were on top of it. Signs every 20 feet. Biohazard zone. Do not enter. Authorized personnel only. No logos. No government agency. Just black stenciled words on steel plates. Behind the fence was a clearing. Flat. Artificial. At the center stood a structure. White modular units fused together like shipping containers. Power cables ran from a small solar field into the side. A single tower rose above it all, barely 20 meters, with a rotating dish on top. We didn't speak as we watched. Mason looked through binoculars we'd scavenged and said he saw 2 people in hazmat gear walking the perimeter, carrying tablet devices. One of them paused, turned toward our direction, then moved on. Not military, he said. Too clean, too casual. Corporate? Clarice asked. Maybe private biotech, black site. We stayed hidden for hours, waiting. No movement beyond the 2 patrols, no vehicles, just the hum of machinery and the wind. Then the door opened. A 3rd figure emerged. No suit, no armor, just a white lab coat, rolled sleeves, and dark rubber gloves. He stood in the sun for a moment, checked something on a pad, and gestured towards the forest. 2 more stepped out, dragging someone. A woman, limp, conscious, tied at the wrists. She wore civilian clothes, blood on her collar, her head lolled from side to side. They brought her to a metal platform just outside the modular complex and strapped her to a gurney. The man in the lab coat checked her pupils, shined a light in her eyes and spoke something we couldn't hear. Then he stepped back and gave a nod. One of the suited men injected something into her arm. She convulsed, then stilled. The other man tapped a screen. A door opened in the side of the unit, and a mechanical arm extended, like an autoclave or sterilization chamber. They wheeled her in. The door hissed shut. We backed away slowly, using the brush for cover. I looked at Mason. He didn't say anything, just kept moving. Clarice was shaking now, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. None of us did. We didn't understand what we had seen, but we knew one thing for sure. They weren't cleaning up the outbreak. They were preserving it, containing it, using it. And the people they took, they weren't getting cured. We moved south for 2 more days, avoiding every sound, every clearing, every trail. We drank water from leaves and slept in trees. Mason grew sick from something he ate, and Clarice's shoulder had started to fester again. She didn't complain. I could see the red streak running down her back. On the evening of the second day, we saw fire in the distance. Not a wildfire, controlled. Campfire, maybe. We approached slowly, crouching behind a berm, until we saw them. 7 people, all armed, all dirty, all older than us. No uniforms, no insignia, just weathered clothes and sharp eyes. One of them spotted us and raised a weapon, but the oldest among them, a woman with a grey ponytail and a scar across her cheek, signaled him down. "Where you from?" she asked, as we stepped into the light. "Henderson," I said. "Shelter zone." She nodded like that meant something. "Heard they turned it into an incineration site." "They did? You infected?" "No." She gestured for us to sit. "Then you've got 2 choices. You can keep moving and hope you don't run into any of the clean slate people, or you stay with us and disappear." "Disappear how?" "We've got a route, south, into the marsh. No one goes there. Nothing to find. That's the point." Clarice nodded before I could speak. Mason looked at her, then at me. "No more waiting," he said. "No more hoping for rescue." The woman passed us each a tin plate and a spoon. Rice and squirrel meat. Best thing I'd eaten in weeks. "We're not freedom fighters," she said. "We're not building anything. We're not saving anyone. But we're not letting them harvest what's left of us." That night, I sat under the stars, listening to the swamp frogs and the wind in the trees. Clarice slept with a blanket over her head. Mason kept a watch near the fire. The walkie was silent. I turned it off. No one was coming. But we were still here. And as long as we were still here, we could choose what to do with the days we had left, however few they might be. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.